I think so. Okay. Yeah. All right. Perfect. Okay. Well then, we can go ahead and get started.
Can you record it?
It's already recording.
Okay.
Yep. All right. I'll just hang out here. So we're ready whenever you are, I think.
Okay, well, this is a new experience. This reminds me when I first got started in communications many hundred years ago. So I welcome all of you to our presentation tonight, our conversation tonight. Those of you who are coming in virtually and those gathered here. It's good to see many of you people. I haven't seen some of you for a long time. So it's always good to come back here to Mount St. John's to share some ideas. And so I've been asked to share some ideas that I shared with the Archdiocese of Cincinnati Beacons of Light group that back in, I think it was in May, I gave the presentation. And since that time, interesting enough, I've been asked to give sections, elements of this throughout the diocese to other people. So I'm glad to share this with you. And I've just returned from being over a week with my religious community in Baltimore, Maryland, dealing with our future, which is, we've been preparing for this future for a very long time, and it reflects where the church is today. The place where I feel most comfortable is that we're all in this together. It's, you know, the changes and the shifts that are going on aren't just with this community or this diocese or this archdiocese or this country. Everything is shifting. We know that within the church, but not only within the church, but within our culture, our families and societies and education and everything. In one sense, I find it an exciting time to be. In another sense, I'm really glad I'm as old as I am, because I'm not sure I want to have to deal with what comes next. Yeah, that's why we need young people around to pick up those pieces. That's where my mind is now. So I'm trying to really recalibrate. As my plane was landing in Kentucky, my mind was trying to recalibrate. Great, I'm coming back to Dayton, back to the university, and back to be with you folks, and back to just life and see where it goes. So, there are a number of things I want to share, and Gabby is going to help me with the changing slides. And we'll probably be a little cryptic doing this, but you can go to the next slide, Gab. I'll just say next slide, and we'll just go. So the whole Beacons of Light project, the Archdiocese of Cincinnati is not the only diocese that's experiencing this. The Institute for Pastoral Initiatives at UD, we work with many dioceses around the world, and particularly those in the United States. Almost every diocese that we're working with has some kind of similar program to Beacons of Light in process. And for that reason, the Institute, we are just dealing with constant change, lots of Zoom meetings with dioceses, with personnel, trying to understand where they are, what are going to be their needs. And a lot of people just really aren't sure right now. So we're in this, I call it, we're living in a time between parentheses. There's our past and there's our future, and we're in time between parentheses, and we're trying to figure out what it is. But again, we're all in this together. Every diocese is going through the same thing. Some are more advanced than others. Even some countries around the world are more advanced than the United States when it comes to reimagining what it means to be church. And some are moving much faster than the United States. That's one of the reasons for me, and when I look at my own life, I always consider myself more of an international person versus a national person, because I think internationally all the time. And so when I think things are down in the United States, I think of another part of the world. And I get excited about what's going on in the church and the people I know. So the Beacons of Light is a multifaceted program, initiative for the church. I love the idea. I love prisms. Maybe you also like prisms. You know, you have the idea of a prism that if we look at the light that comes into the prism is God's presence, and it comes through the prism and it radiates in so many different beautiful colors, and those colors reflect the diversity within the church. And we're going to see more and more diversity within the church than Not that we didn't see it before, but it's becoming more dynamic, especially as parishes begin to merge, converge, or become families, or whatever else we're calling them. We're seeing that diversity of cultures and peoples is really important for us to begin to accept, where before we could have been very comfortable. I grew up in a strong Polish neighborhood and German neighborhood, Polish and German, in Erie, Pennsylvania. And, the Germans did their thing and the Poles did their thing and the Italians did their thing. Well, now, we have been merging, but even now we're merging even more. And it's not just European cultures, but now it's African, it's Asian, it's Hispanic. There's just a lot of diversity coming in. So next slide. So we see this beacons, this change going on. There's 2 books. If you're looking for books to study as a group on this topic, these are 2. I love these 2 books. They're both, you can go on YouTube and you will find them as YouTube videos. So if you don't want to read the book, like some students, they say to me, "Sister, where can I find it on YouTube?" But these are great. Peacocks in the Land of Penguins is great. It's the story about a peacock that comes to this land of penguins. And of course, the peacock has a lot of color and a lot of diversity. And she tries to initiate some creative ideas, and the peacocks have their way of, the penguins have their way of doing things. And so it's the idea of dealing with change. So I think I just love that. So if you're talking about change and creativity and accept diversity, our iceberg is melting, another penguin story. It deals with a penguin that sees something everybody else doesn't see. The penguin sees that their iceberg is melting. The penguin goes under the iceberg and it sees these huge caverns, and it tries to come up and tell all the other penguins and the leader penguins that the iceberg is melting and we have to do something about it. The leadership penguins don't want to do anything about it. But it goes on to demonstrate how this one single penguin brought about change with the others. Now, I have used both of these videos. I've done a lot of consulting with the Asian Bishops Communications Committee. So I've gone to Bangkok and Thailand and several other countries to give talks. And I've used both of these books, and the penguins are black and white, so all these bishops in front of me have black and white. So I sort of always have to do a preamble that I'm not directly relating, speaking of bishops and archbishops, but I am dealing about change. But I do think these 2 books are worthy of you to consider on your ongoing conversation. Next slide. So I do sense that we're at this crossroads. They tell us, or we are told, that change happens in religious life every 500 or 600 years, major change. If that's the case, that's why we are in, that's one rationale for why religious life is in this major change. Not only religious life of women's and men's communities, but also the church. It's just the signs of the times. While I was in Baltimore, I was staying at a Benedictine monastery, living in a Benedictine monastery, which I love so much. I want to stay there the rest of my life. But it was just really quiet. But in the morning, I got up really, really early in the morning because I got a lot of good sleep there. I went to YouTube and I started looking at the history of the Roman Empire, the history of the Byzantium, and the history of just different. I love history. And as I looked at how things change, I said, this is norm. Change is norm. We just happen to be that time between parentheses. We're at the time of crossroads of where there is change. Next slide. We'll probably go pretty fast. So if we don't nurture our community, we cannot create long-term sustainable growth and impact. So keeping that in mind, what we need to do is that we need to nurture our communities for this time between parentheses. We have been really gifted at this moment of time. And this, I believe this is where we trust in the Holy Spirit, and we have a sense of hope that it's not that we have scarcity, but we have abundance. We have a tendency to go more negative, to say what we don't have. We don't have enough members, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough this, we don't have enough that, but we forget the richness that we have, and we need to celebrate that. So if we don't nurture our community, we're not going to be able to continue that sustainability. And I think with the lay Marianist community, that's who you are all about, of nurturing this community into the future. I can't even read this now.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So one of the challenges facing the synodal church, because the relationship between the beacons of light and synodality is very important. I'm not sure if it's a gift or a curse that the beacons of light has happened at the same time that synodality has happened, because they're sort of pressing against one another. Other parts of the world, they've already engaged in synodality and are much further ahead than we are. You may know that Pope Francis has extended the idea of synodality for one more year. Initially, I think it was in 2023 that he was going to have a synod, and he added it a year. And what I hear from my friends in Rome is that people have not been taking synodality seriously enough in some parts of the world, and particularly in the United States. And so he's extended it. And for what I understand is Pope Francis is initiating a new ecclesiology, a new way of being church. And this is why it's so difficult to get all of this moving forward. So when we think about the beacons of light, I think we need to think in terms of synodality. I was giving a talk in a parish not too long ago, and I brought up the concept of synodality, and half the people in the group had never even heard about what synodality
Could you give
is.
us a thumbnail of what synodality is?
Sure, thank you.
hear it a lot.
Yes. So Pope Francis has called, Pope Francis has been working continually to reimagine how we are to be church in the 21st century. So the synodality, well, first of all, the word synod means when bishops come together to discuss important issues of the church. And it was the Second Vatican Council that called for synods. So that's what a synod is. Synodality is Pope Francis moved it forward, saying not only are the bishops to come together to talk about what are the issues in the church, he wants the whole church to be involved in conversation. He wants everyone to be talking about what are the issues, the concerns, and where should the church be moving forward. So he's asking every parish, every diocese, every Episcopal conference to have this ongoing conversation of what does it mean to be church in the 21st century, and wants to hear those voices, and then bring together those bishops and the lay people together with their ideas to come together in Rome and say, well, what does this mean for who we are to be in the church? So synodality is all about listening, the church listening, and the church moving forward in a new direction. Does that help?
Yeah, but I don't see it. Church is a church.
Well,
Certain things don't change.
Well, that's why the Pope is extended it one more year. No,
You could extend it another 2,000 years.
that's true. That's very true.
Locally, in February, St. Albert's hosted a gathering, and there was about 180, 200 people that came. And they talked through questions at their tables, and then they wrote a 10-page report of what came out of the conversation. And if you read it, it's very well done. It's really fascinating. Yeah, I'll forward you the link.
You can go to the Archdiocese of Cincinnati website
And then they
and
wrote
click
a
on Beacons of
10-page,
Light,
yeah,
and you will find all the videos, all the summaries, all the presentations, even my presentation that was given is there. No, I think your question, your name is?
Dan Russ.
Dan, okay. I think you've made a very important comment. What I have seen, because since I am reading the different summaries of the synodality conferences around the world, there's a lot of common denominators. There's a lot of common themes that have been running through the summary reports. If the institutional church, remember the church is the people of God. We are the church. There's the institutional church, but there is the church. Pope Francis, I believe, is trying to heighten our consciousness and our participation that we are the church. The people of God are the church, and we all have a voice, and therefore we have to speak our voice. If the institutional church elements of the institutional church, listen or not, what do? But we keep on moving because we are church. If we look at all the different changes that Pope Francis has been trying to bring on in the church, he has been, I pray every day that he lives long enough to create enough cardinals for the next Vatican Council that have some of his spirit. I want to believe that change will take place. But again, I keep saying, think of church universal and not just local. And that's where our faith comes in.
I pray for its conversion.
Well, we can do that too.
Yeah,
We can definitely do that.
absolutely.
Can do that. So I think those are good. But that's what synodality is. So I think synodality and the beacons of light go hand in hand together. And so there's so the motion, okay. The motion of agency. I'm just going to say something and we might go through a couple slides. The idea of agency is when we are able to have a voice, and Dan, what we're talking about here, when we have a voice to be able to speak out. I think the beacons of light is an opportunity for us to have a voice, to use our voice, to show up at events and to talk about who we are. Because if we don't use our agency, we just become silent. It's like anything. It's like voting for the next president or the next elections. Those who say, I don't want to vote because I don't believe in what's going to happen. I can't bring about change. Well, no vote is a vote. And people forget to think about that. But agency means that we need to express our voice. So we rarely feel we have any sense of agency. We only become aware when we sense a lack of it, when we don't feel that anybody is really hearing or listening to us. I'm teaching, or I'm facilitating. I prefer to facilitate than use the word teach. I'm facilitating a mini course on, it's called Prophetic Voices in Contemporary Times. And a friend of mine has produced these films. He's from Journey Films. He's an international film producer. And the films my students are looking at is Abraham Heschel, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dorothy Day, Reinhold Niebuhr, and Howard Thurman. Those five. And they are those films are fantastic. And each of those films talk about a man and a woman who have used their agency, have used their voice to bring about change in critical times during the 20th century. And I think we can find witnesses and heroes in those people who have that kind of agency. And I'm really thrilled to have the students do that. As a matter of fact, I had the producer speaking to my class by way of Zoom today about the passion that he has. He has decided to only produce films, documentary films that have impact, a prophetic impact on our cultures, and to tell those stories. So I think that's what we need to do as we move forward. Keep going. Let's go back. Keep going. Okay, so that's a little bit about synodality. So I want to introduce another idea about the Tabor light that gives us courage during this time of beacons of light. A number of years ago, I was gifted with to go to the Holy Land for 2 weeks. And I had just purchased Pope Benedict's trilogy on the Jesus of Nazareth. And the second book on Jesus of Nazareth, he talks about the Transfiguration, which I absolutely love, his story of the Transfiguration. And he talks about that when the three apostles joined Jesus and there was this light appeared, he calls it, Pope Benedict called it the Tabor light. And then he used the term, which I couldn't believe he used this term. He used the term, they experienced the other dimension. That sounds very science fiction, doesn't it? The other dimension. And he used those terms, other dimension. As a matter of fact, Pope Francis has gone back and used that term of what it is. It's the other dimension versus heaven or whatever else I really like that term. The other, it seems more realistic to us. But he said they experienced the other dimension. That light, that Tabor light was there. And he goes on to explain the meaning of that Tabor light and says that Tabor light is around us all the time. It's here in this room. The Tabor light is here. That other dimension is present with us here if we have sufficient faith to believe in the Tabor light. So that other dimension, so that we live in a time between parentheses, that parentheses disappears because in that Tabor light, we experience it. So we experience that otherness. And we may say that another way, those who have died, those who have gone before us, we feel that they're very close to us. They're in that other dimension, but they're still with us and still communicating. So there's a bit of science fiction in Pope Benedict and Pope Francis with this Tabor light. So when we look at this whole call for the beacons of light, it's a call for communion, participation, and mission. How can we develop a stronger sense of communion or community when we're bringing 4, 5, or 6 parishes together? One of the clusters, I understand, has 12 parishes in its cluster. And I just can't even imagine it. I was talking with a woman who's part of that cluster. When I hear that all of this is supposed to make the church more dynamic and more, I can't even imagine how that can, when I talk with some of the priests, I don't know how that is, but we're asked to form new ways of community, new forms of communion, different than we've ever had before. We're asked to engage in new kinds of participation than before. I believe the Beacons of Light is a call for laity to assume their dominant role within the church, different than before. If not, it's not going to happen. I mean, I think that's just the reality of it. Therefore, we need to have programs, courses, workshops, seminars that it's ongoing leadership formation within our parishes, so that we don't have the same people doing the same thing all the time. You know, in the past, I always say, you know, if people don't want to volunteer in a parish because you volunteer for the rest of your life. You know, I in my graduate course on organization and management leadership, I think, you know, when you're working in a parish, make sure you have job descriptions for the volunteers. To say this job description starts, you know, January 1, 2023, and it ends January 2025. So they can get out and you can get rid of them if you want to get rid of them. So it works both ways. So I think so this idea of participation and we're mission, and we are all on mission. We're all on mission. Isn't that what Marianists we talk about? We are all on mission. Pope Francis's articles and his documents always talk about we are a missionary people. We are missionary disciples. We are all on mission. That doesn't mean that we're out knocking on people's doors trying to convert them, but we are all on mission in our life. We are to be witnessing every moment of our day. So we are on mission every day of our life. It's missionary activity. And he relates to that, sort of relates back to the Tabor light. He says, you know, our God is a living God. Our God is not a museum God. Our God is active all the time. And this is why I love Abraham Heschel. Well, the past several months, I've been reading I'm trying to read all the Abraham Heschel books I can get, because his spirituality deeply moves me, of his sense of God's presence in our life and our communion with God. But there's a lot of Benedict and a lot of Francis that's picked up from Abraham Heschel's work. So I encourage you to go explore some Abraham Heschel, particularly along the way. So holiness simply means wholeness. It means that we are becoming whole. You can go on. I'll go on before that. Okay. So let's just think outside the box. So let me just stop there. Does any of this make sense? I'm sort of, you caught me at night after I had a nice, good long rest today after a long flight. So stop me at any time and say, oh, I have another, like, Dan, stop me.
Well, what are we, Catholics? That means universal. I mean, we all believe certain things. So if you have one parish, 2 parishes, 20 parishes, what's the difference? You've got different personalities, but it doesn't change the universality of the church.
It's very true. Perhaps some parishes have not lived that way. we've lived very cloistered, isolated parish lives. I grew up in one parish was Polish and one was German. My grandmother would say on Sunday, in the summers, I lived with my grandparents. And my grandfather loved to go to the German church because he didn't understand the homily, so he could sleep, I think. But and the German church was 2 blocks away and the Polish church was 3 blocks away. And my grandmother would always say to me, should say to me in Polish, make sure your grandfather takes you to the Polish church. And on the way to church, he would say to me, make sure you tell your grandmother we went to the German church. And so my grandmother always believed that the Germans worshiped the German God and Poles had the real God. So, so anyway, we had these ongoing battles, theological battles that went on in our own family. But so we have to think outside the box of where we want to go into the future. So moving, click a couple times, and then we can one more time, keep going, one more time. Okay, go back. Okay, just click them all on. Okay, so there's a book that I use in my grad class. It's by Ronald Heifetz. Thank you. It's called it's Leadership on the Line and Another one is Adaptive Challenge. And he says for moving forward, we can look at the situation in the church today because we have a lot going on. We can either look at it as a technical fix or an adaptive challenge. And that means when we realize something needs to be changed, we say, this is how we used to do it and it worked. So let's do it at the same thing again. That's a technical fix. We try to apply something we knew before and apply it to the present time. If it worked 5 years ago, why does it work today? If it worked last year, why does it work today? He says we need to look at the future as an adaptive challenge. The technical fix simply does not work anymore. There has to be another way of moving forward. Adaptive challenge means that we look for many different possible solutions. When we look at all these different possible solutions, that's where we begin to see possibilities. So we have to be open to possibilities. And so which direction you want to go? There's another book, you know, the famous Matthew Kelly. He's some things that I think he writes some really good things. Some things I like and some things I could deal with. But he wrote this book, The Culture Solution. And I was introduced to this book recently and I really, really like it. He talks about the creation of a dynamic culture. And he talks about it regarding the business, the corporate world. But I do believe it relates to ourselves as church. We are a culture. The church is a culture. We need to create a more dynamic church culture. A new dynamic church culture. So what is it that we can do to create this culture? We take a lot for granted when we talk about culture. You know, what is culture? We can spend a long time about culture, but we know that every parish has its own culture. Now we're bringing parishes together, so they're forming a new culture. How are we going to deal with that new sense of culture? How are we going to allow it to come to life, to fruition? But I think Matt Kelly's book is worthy of consideration. So for too many leaders, culture isn't important until it's urgent. And by the time it's urgent, it's too late. That I think is so important. We have to be thinking into the future and not just thinking of the present.
Well, like with our parish, we've got all new parishes together and we've got the new pastor and other priests coming in and they're stirring the pot and some things are better, I think, a lot better.
Which parish are you in?
St. Luke's.
Oh, okay.
Our old pastor, I think he was really in a rut. His chalice is a glass mug. I think a chalice should be precious metal. And the new priest has all precious metal. I mean, that's a little thing, but
Well, sometimes little things are important. Anyone else have thought about this?
I'm just thinking, yeah, the culture has to change, it has to evolve. But forcing it to change, does that always work? How do we make it evolve without coming over the structure and trying to do fixes to it? Yeah, I know the fixes don't work because I've seen it doesn't work. But how do you make it evolve when you have resistance on every side? I mean, you have people in all the parishes that are going to be resisting, that are already.
I understand that. I'm hearing some very sad stories. By the very fact that people are resisting, they're forming the next culture.
Yeah, but
Whether they're aware of it or not, they're influencing the formation of the culture.
I
that's
kind
great.
I kind of want to draw a parallel to family. You can be raised in a family of, a mom and a dad, and say you have 4 or 5 siblings. Most of us are old enough to be of families that have, multiple siblings. And each of those siblings gets married to someone from 5 different families. And then when you come together and you try to have, say, Christmas, how do you celebrate Christmas? Because the oldest sibling married a person who they didn't celebrate on Christmas, they celebrated sometime between Christmas and New Year's, or or how do you go on vacation together? Because all of these people that you brought into your family have a way of thinking about it. And you like some of those ideas of your spouse, or, and you want to incorporate those, and what it really comes down to is learning how to listen and to compromise and to say each family of origin had a beautiful culture. And the family that married into the person who came into this family grew up in a beautiful family culture too. And how do we get the best of all of those family cultures to be this big, new, beautiful culture? And I think I think we're going to see the same kinds of struggles that the general family sees when they try to do big vacations or Christmas or Thanksgiving, and you have to adapt and change. And I think our parishes need to recognize that it's not going to be easy, but it's going to require a lot of listening and a lot of compromise and give and take, just like it does in secular families.
No, that's a very good point. So I think, related to your point, the reality is that we need to be thinking about culture more frequently than we've thought about it in the past. We were sort of, we're set, we think we know who we are and where we are, and we can't think that anymore. We have to think, so cultures, so it isn't until something changes that we begin to talk about it. So the kind of conversation we're having now about culture in the parish and beacons of light, we wouldn't have talked about this 5 years ago, but we should have been thinking about it 5 years ago.
And training people to accompany.
And training people. So in my religious community, well, I think probably in the university, I probably drive everybody crazy. Have always all my years, but I consider myself an entrepreneur or a futurist. Not that I necessarily am telling future, but I think in terms of what we should be doing. So within my community, and sisters brought this up this past week. No kidding, 25 years ago, I said we should be forming our sisters as leaders. We should be preparing ourselves for a new way of religious life. And I just went on with all these things, and nothing ever happened because sisters just didn't think that it was urgent at that time. We were satisfied. Everything was hunky-dory. We had everything that we needed. And now we're at a place that we've sold our mother house, where we're just in a whole different place. We're looking at we not having future leadership. And somebody said, well, Angela Ann talked about this 25 years ago. But, you sort of just take it all in. But I think what this statement is saying, that we need to be thinking about this all the time. That we're in a place in church ecclesiology where we just don't take church for granted. That it's not, we don't leave it up to the Vatican, we don't leave it up to the US Catholic Bishops Conference, we don't leave it up to our pastor, but we all are working together of thinking into the future. And when, and the church needs to listen to us. We might think the church isn't, but we have to keep pushing our voice forward. We look at the church. The church was formed by religious communities of women and men, isn't it? And they were almost all founders and foundresses of religious communities were lay people. Eventually it turned into a religious community. You know, there's over 175, more than that, 175 lay communities that were formed since the Second Vatican Council in the United States. That's only in the United States. I know in the Caribbean, there's at least 82 lay communities that have been formed. They're called Public Association of Christ Faithful. They're leading the church, and they're leading the church in the Caribbean. I work with them because I've been working in Latin America. They are lay men and women, some married, some single. It's like the Marianist lay communities, but they're doing great work. I mean, but they are the voice. They are doing more than any other group in the church. So the one group I work with, the Living Water community, they have 32 members. They call them household members. They take simple vows. But they have several hundred consecrated people. They're married or lay. But then they have covenanted members of 900. And they have 28 major ministries with a budget of something like $52 million. And they're not, I worked with them with their chapter. They're not going to be caught up into the structure of the church because they won't be able to do what they do because men and women live together. You can't do that in religious life. And they can make their own decisions and they can go their own ways. I mean, I think that could be part of what comes out of the beacons of light at different levels, in different ways. But I think this is where I think Marianist lay communities are your futurists. You're futurists and bringing young people into the fray of conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sister, I'm looking at this slide that says, and by the time it's urgent, it's too late. And I feel like we're at a point where the necessity where you talked about training lay people to be those leaders and to take on new roles and that future. I think a lot of people probably listening and in this room, we see that. It feels urgent. It feels like a necessity. But then the leaders, it's like, well, no, we're going to keep on this course. And then all of a sudden it's going to be too late. That's my fear. Just what Matthew Kelly said. So how do we, and I think there's so many opportunities that arise. So just working in a school where, we can't have mass every week anymore. So, well, now we have to shift gears and now we're training students to plan and lead these kind of things. And it's like, well, I don't want to say it's a good thing, but good things are coming from this. So how do we keep that going and say, well, this is necessary. This has to happen. But I just feel like then there's the leaders like, well, nope, we're going to stay on this course. And, that's the lesser.
Well, don't you think,
idea.
yeah, when they started talking about beacons of light a year ago, 2 years ago, I started thinking about, well, what happened to when we paired the parishes? Where you had two parishes, twinning, or whatever it was called.
We had our 3 parishes, IC.
Yeah, Immaculate St. Helens and
Ascension,
and Ascension. And the idea at that point was to bring those 3 parishes together and to meld some of the, like RCIA, some of those things that we did as a parish that you only had for RCIA, one parish might only have 2 candidates or 2 catechumens, and another parish might have 3, and then, but you're using all the same, you're drawing resources and limiting the resources for each of those parishes to do their own thing instead of bringing those together and doing it all. And if we had been doing that, Beacons of Light would have been, this would have been okay, we'll just move
Would have
forward.
been a transition.
Yeah, an easier transition, and you would, I don't believe anyway, you would hear as much aches and angst about how are we gonna meld these parishes together, and how are these parishes gonna become one, and what are we gonna do with all these buildings and all of this stuff that's, people are talking about, and why can't one priest, we have 3 parishes here, why can't one priest be at each parish and not be rotating all 3 every Sunday and having a different priest at each parish every Sunday, but we would have been there to a point, we would have been there if they would have encouraged and done that 10 years ago when we started the twinning process.
Well, that goes back to that quote that I
Yeah.
just had up there. So where we are today is Pope Francis has opened the door by way of synodality, and then we're facing with Beacons of Light. Okay, this is our time. So we can't go back and reinvent what we should have done in the past.
No.
I don't think it's too late, but it definitely is our time. It's our time to act. It's our time to express our voice. And it's our time to do what we feel we are called to do. And I think that that is just very, very, very important. The statistics that were presented to us during my community days, our pre-chapter meeting. The projection is, but it could change. The projection is there will be fewer religious, women religious and religious men. But the indicators are that more men are entering the priesthood. Now, that concerns me as a woman in the church.
Why?
So if that's
Why would that concern you?
well, because we're moving more to a clerical environment. And I think that there needs to be more voices in the institutional reality.
But if you're bedrock, there's some things only a priest can do. And if you're saying, well, that should change, that's a whole different thing.
Well, I think we need to keep our minds, I'll probably be hung for this. We need to keep our minds and our hearts open to a lot of things. Our sisters that are in Latin America and some of the deep missions, they're doing almost everything a priest does because there simply are no priests. So we're faced with the reality.
So that's what you're saying, the more men were called to it. Maybe that's why.
Well, maybe, but
The Holy Spirit is.
But I also want to believe that there's a role for, I think there's a role for laity and women in the church. And otherwise it's going to get top heavy. So I'm not going to fight about or argue whether we have more men or not. I'm simply saying where there's a tendency, there seems to be a trend in that direction.
It seems to me, in our parish I've seen, there's more women getting involved than ever. And different levels, particularly Eucharistic, presentation, or giving out the Eucharist, and also at all different levels.
Yeah.
In fact, there's maybe not enough men being involved.
That because the women want to be involved.
Well, that's good too.
Yeah.
That's the Holy Spirit, I think.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting. I prayed when I was giving my one talk to the diocese regarding Beacons of Light, a question was asked by a woman who said, well, what was my advice when the leadership in the parish doesn't want to go along with Beacons of Light? And I thought, oh, do I want to answer this question? And there was a priest on the panel with us. And so I simply said, Father Jim, do you want to answer this question? I didn't want to be hung by that. And then after he answered the question, the woman came back and said, but sister, I want to know what your answer is. And so I said, I really hope, I pray that the leadership would be zapped by the Holy Spirit. And that became the line for the rest of the day. In fact, they ended the full day workshop saying, well, let's all pray we all get zapped by the Holy Spirit. But so I don't want to get hung up on that, but I do believe that there's just room for this. I mean, this is the early church. It's room for all of us to participate. We are the church. We see this with young people. They're all across the continuum, that are working with young people in high school. There are those that are far to the right and those are far to the left, and there's a heck of a lot of people in between. And it's the same thing in our parishes. COVID-19 has changed everything. It's just like 9/11 changed everything. COVID-19 has changed everything. People don't have the same concerns about church as they used to have. People aren't afraid of hell anymore. That you can't, and I'm not saying people shouldn't be afraid of hell, or shouldn't, but it's changed everything. So this is the opportunity that we have. And I think during the Beacons of Light, getting involved is important. So let's go through, okay, keep going. Let's see, keep going. Go one more, keep going. Okay, let's just go back one. Pick up the 3 words. Okay. So I do believe Beacons of Light calls us for a new sense of collaboration. And I use the word stewardship, solidarity, and synergy. Stewardship, it means that we all have an investment into our faith. It's not that we just go to Mass on Sunday, we keep the 10 Commandments, but stewardship is the whole package. It's the Catholic social teachings. It's living of the Beatitudes. It's how we witness day in and day out. So stewardship is stewardship of the faith. Our Catholics traditionally have not been prepared to be stewards of the faith. They just have. I look at my own family. They're not going to see this video. I look at my own family. I pray every day. I pray every day for them. There's not, she's going to maybe edit me out.
No, I was checking our battery.
Yeah. I can't go to my own family and talk about, my couple of my brother-in-laws say, oh, here she goes again. She's going to do her religious thing again. Even some of my nieces and nephews, or some of my nieces and nephews, they think I'm intriguing because nobody else talks the way I talk in the family. I talk about God, talk about supernatural. Aunt Ann, you're really interesting. But it's stewardship. We need to take that idea of stewardship of the faith and solidarity. It's related to synodality, solidarity. We're all in this together. If I go back to religious communities, so we had a number of different religious communities that were speaking to us this past week, who are small communities that have 30 or less, and one of them had 10 in their community. I'd stayed with the Benedictine community that only had 10, and the youngest is 70. So we're talking. I'm still the young person in the community when they say the young sisters are going to clean up. I'm still cleaning up at 78. So, what do you do? You have to have a sense. So, it really is funny. So this thing of solidarity. So we're talking about all these communities that are smaller. How can we come together and support one another? It doesn't mean we have to merge together, do anything, but we're together. Maybe that's what the new form of religious life is going to be. It's not going to be all these individual communities, but they are going to be women religious and men religious. So we're going to form something new. And that's great to be part of that. But solidarity in our parishes, it's where you're going back to. How do all the parishes in Dayton see that there's solidarity? not the inner city, not those in the suburbs, not anywhere, but we are all one. We are all one parish. It's not just the United States, but we are the world. I mean, that solidarity is key. And synergy, that synergy comes from that. It's not, synergy is when a lot of people come together. You have more energy than one doing it by themselves. There used to be up in the northern part of the Archdiocese, I don't know if any of you might have heard, there was a group called The Way.
Yeah.
Do you remember The
Her
Way?
sister.
I know about.
Oh, you know about The Way? So when I was working in the northern part of the diocese in the 1970s, that's when The Way was sort of founded. And, the northern part of the Archdiocese is Catholic, or was Catholic. Huh? I mean, if you weren't Catholic, you just didn't live in the northern part of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. You just didn't.
Well,
I mean, every 6 or 7 miles, I know, every 6 or 7 miles, you had a Catholic church.
Yeah, but you got a lot of Lutherans.
Oh, I know, but I mean, this is sort of an extrovert, but there are lots of Catholics up there. And you have Maria Stein Retreat House, and you have the Relic Chapel, and you have the Precious Blood, headquarters and all of that. But, there, all of that was, you felt Catholic when you were up there. You were Catholic because everybody was Catholic. Everybody was
I
related.
don't think the Holy Ghost was with The Way, because they're kind of falling apart.
Well, that's what I was headed, but I met up with the founder of The Way when I was working in the 70s. And I don't remember what the context was that I was in the room with this. It was some kind of gathering. And he was talking about the thousands of people that were coming weekly to his Bible classes. I mean, thousands up north. They're all Catholic. What are they going to The Way for? They're not coming to my classes, thousands. I might have 30 or 40, but I did a thousand. And he said, sister, the problem is that you Catholics don't charge enough money. If you charge more money, they would see it would be more valuable. You're too. And I remember having that conversation.
So for those of us who didn't grow up around here in the 70s, 80s, what was The Way?
The Way was a kind of cultic religious group.
Okay.
Someone who founded his own church, and it was very cultic.
Okay.
Mega church.
A mega church. Now, I have heard most recently, now you did not hear this from me.
Make sure we pause the video.
I just heard that there are a small group of Catholics up in that northern area that are forming their own church because they're not happy with the Beacons of Light. So,
I've heard similar things.
yeah, so, we can anticipate we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more of this. So that's why we come back with stewardship, solidarity, and synergy around what we believe. And I come back to the lay movements in the church. What I see with the lay Marianist, what I have seen in the Caribbean in particular, because I work with a number of them in the Caribbean, that's where the energy is of the future of the church. You may or may not see it in its full extent right now, but it's there. And you have to believe in it. You really have to believe in it. And I remember when I visited, when I was teaching in Lyon, France in March for a number of years, I went to the Visitation Convent of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, and just recently was her feast day. And I visited her tomb, and in French, there's a quote that she received through some spiritual encounter with the Lord. It says, if you believe in me, you will experience the power of my heart. I love that. I remember that every morning when I get up out of bed. If you believe in me, you will experience the power of my heart. And I think with lay people, our lay people, heck, women religious are lay people in the church. That's it. So if we believe, we will experience the power of his heart. We will experience the power to do what we need to do. So you're part of that. So I'm looking at the time. So, okay, let's go forward. Is this okay? Is this what you wanted? I don't know if you wanted it. I'm sort of moving along here. So there's this other book, Ben Zanders. You can go on YouTube for this too. Ben Zanders has a video called The Art of Possibility. I use this in my classes as well. Ben Zanders talks about we have to see possibilities. Instead of looking at scarcity, we have to look at possibilities. During a time of change, people aren't afraid of change, they're afraid of loss.
Yes,
My community, we've gone, we knew 20 some years ago, we were going to have sell our mother house and that sisters were going to live differently. And we went through the loss period. So they're not afraid of, they were afraid of loss at the time. So we're not afraid of change. They were afraid of loss at one time. And now we're gone beyond it. But so people are afraid of, we change all the time. We change our diets, we change our food, we change the school we go to, we change our clothes, we change what we like, we don't like, our TV programs. It's the loss and it's the essential losses. So people are not afraid of change. They're afraid of loss. So how with the beacons of light, and that's what I was talking to the group about, with the beacons of light, how do we somehow hold on to the idea of loss is more gain than we have. Anyway, this book is a great book to read. So if we desire to see possibilities, we need to alter our perceptions. Instead of thinking about scarcity, we have to think about abundance. What do we have together? Not what we don't have. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough whatever. We don't think about it. We think of abundance. Look at this room. If we were the last of the faith community in the city of Dayton, what is the abundance that exists in this room to make something happen rather than versus the scarcity? Because we have to alter our perceptions. And that's what the prophetic voice is. That's what I talk about in my class. Walter Bergerman, who was a biblical scholar, he talked about the whole prophetic voice. And some of the people I talked about before, a prophetic voice presents an alternative consciousness to the dominant conscience that exists. So the alternative conscience, and that alternative conscience is both one that's is a critique of the culture, but also gives the culture a sense of hope. And I think that's what this possibilities are. So next slide. Okay, I'm going to just show a few more slides and we'll just this slide just I think sort of helps it. So we need to spiral up and not spiral down. Next slide. We go thick. So the gravitational pull always is to spiral down, isn't it? It's easier to spiral down than to go up. So we need to call upon our passion versus our fear during this time. When we look at the changes that are going on in the parishes, we need to find a way to spiral up. We need to invest in our positive energy. But the tendency is to, when I meet with groups and parishes in the diocese, I only hear spiraling down, what we're losing, what's not there, what we're not going to have. We're not going to have enough priests. We're not going to, and I know how it is with Mass. Some days I get tired trying to figure out where to go to Mass.
Yes.
Because sometimes the Mass times are changing. And I don't know who's going to celebrate the Mass, and more people are looking for who's celebrating the Mass.
Yes.
And so they're getting really frustrated. Where's my favorite priest going to be for celebrating which
Maybe
Mass?
that's a good thing, because then you Roman Catholic. We've gone to different parishes.
That's true. That's true.
It's not
But-
universal.
That's true. But I think those are all the things that are beginning to happen.
Yeah.
So next slide. Let's see where we can go. Let's go through. Keep going and let's see. I just want to wrap up a couple things. Keep going. I hope you like my slides that I presented for you. So keep going. Okay, stop right there. I'm going to end on this. I'm sorry, I'm going a little over time. I don't know if you folks are familiar with Kintsugi art. I came across this Masato Fujimaro. He's a great Japanese artist, and I've been really intrigued with his life also, his conversion and how he relates arts and theology together. But I came across kintsugi art, and I use this a lot because I think this relates to our parish life and what's going on at Beacons of Light. In the idea with kintsugi is, and sometimes I can't remember if it started in Japan or it started in Korea and when vice versa, but whatever it is. But there were these valuable vases. So let's say it's started in Korea. These valuable vases that when they broke, they didn't want to throw them away, but they didn't know what to do with them. So, I mean, but then they started putting them back together again. And artists, as they put them back together again, started putting this gold filling around them so that this Japanese art of repairing the repaired art became more valuable than the original. Next piece, I think there's another one. Okay, so the kintsugi is the piece became more valuable. So now we think about that's what happens in parish life. We're a broken parish, but we think it's all broken. But maybe by pulling all the pieces together, the kintsugi art can teach us a lesson. That, just maybe what we're going through is going to be much more beautiful and more authentic than what we had before. And that's where we need to have faith. So we're going to see that there are going to be roadblocks along the way. So how can we manage? Go ahead. So we look at the beauty of broken things. So it calls for conversion, reconciliation, and holiness. I'm going to end on this slide. Maybe that's the idea I want you to take away from this. So you're thinking about the Beacons of Light. Think of kintsugi art. And the beauty of all of these, the brokenness that we have, but the conversion and reconciliation is going to bring us to new holiness. I'm going to sneeze. Anyway, amen. It really is a great time. Some days I get a little overwhelmed. Like I said, I wish I were younger because I really would like to be a contributor. But there are other times you say, my day has come and it's gone, but it's great.
Well, you're definitely contributing by your wisdom and insights. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's always good to see you folks. I always say the way to reconnect with friends is to do something with them.
Oh, yeah.
Start a project. Martha knows that. Martha, will you help me do this?
Lots.
Yeah. But anyway, congratulations on all you're doing and all your dedication to the Marianist community and to your vision for the church. And you are the new early church. You're the new early church of the 21st
There
century.
was a lot of persecution in the early church.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And so we have it today.
It was, I think there was also a lot of community though,
Yeah.
too, because to your point about, women doing a lot of what priests do in countries where there are no priests. I mean, I know there's a movement here called Discerning Deacons. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But that just gives me so much hope for women's role in the church and what it evolves to, because as a woman and a mother who did a lot of volunteering when her kids were little, doing the VBS and the all these different things to help form young children into being active members of the church. But then to look at them and say, but you can never, you can only do certain things, to my daughters, or, and that's a hard place to be. Like,
Well, that's
what,
not,
and
I, as a lay person, I can't do what priests do. I don't understand what you're saying. A lay woman can do everything a lay man can do, and vice versa. But maybe not
think
at the
it's-
priest level.
I think we are in a place where we are returning to a place of equality and equity in community as they had in the early church. there are references in the letters of Phoebe and one of the early deaconesses. And I just feel like as we evolved, as we went through various stages of evolution of the church, we lost some things and we let them go. And I feel like right now we're in a place where we want to bring some of those things back. And I also think that there are some things that people really cherish from, you know, the mid-century church that people grew up in, of traditions and things that people don't want to lose. And other people are like, oh, I don't want to have to wear a veil to church, or I don't, you know. And so where do we find that compromise? Where do we find that middle ground that says it's all okay? We just have to respect each other in discerning what do we keep and what do we set aside, and how do we do that in the most loving way we can. And I think that's something that we as a society in the United States have a hard time doing, because we are very me-centric, very, you know, look, my iPhone, my iPad, everything, you know, like that's just one secular example of veering away from community and the need for us as a church to build community. And like you said, I think the Marianists kind of have a corner on the market of being able to do that well.
No, I think that's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing it.
Just real quick, something, because I've been also doing multitasking.
Yes.
Just something that I've been thinking about in relation to this question is the larger question about parish restructuring and that kind of thing is Father Chaminade, when he started the Sodality in Bordeaux, the first group of lay Marianists, he was criticized by some priests and parishes in Bordeaux of, aren't you taking people away from the parish as parishes are rebuilding? And I find it interesting that one of his responses was like, we're not trying to take away from the parish, but we're kind of filling a need that maybe the parish can't fill the way that they are now. And I think that I think this is especially true in the United States because of how we've been immigrant churches that have been so compartmentalized in our ethnic groups, that our imagination of how we worship is so intertwined with the parish. And so I think maybe something that this might be challenging us to do is to think also of how we could be church that's not just the parish. And I think having a charism and a community where you share a charism like the Marianists do, I think is one way that they do that. And I'm not saying get rid of parishes, not at all what I'm saying, but that it's not the only way. This might just be challenging us to remember that.
Yeah, well, that's great.
I think it's a wrong perception that things are broken.
What Dan?
Real interesting, this pottery is real interesting. But I think that's the wrong thing to think it's broken. It may be evolving, things are changing, maybe good and bad. but
Well,
broken or not,
I think it's one example. I mean, we are all broken in one way or another. I mean, to say that we haven't been broken. I think that's part of the human condition. But in that brokenness is our holiness. And if we can understand that in our brokenness is our holiness and our call to holiness, that changes our whole attitude towards our brokenness. Your brokenness, my brokenness, their brokenness. And I think that that's the point that Kintsugi art says to me. I mean, I think it's really
we're all in need of conversion, that's for sure.
well, we're all in
Even the
process.
Holy
Well,
Father,
there-
maybe
someone,
especially the
yeah,
Holy Father.
someone gave me this quote one time to put on my desk, and it says, "Be patient with me because God isn't finished with me yet."
That's a good
And
one.
I love that quote because, anytime something happens, I'm not finished. I'm not sure I'm not sure what I'm going to be or when I grow up.
Yeah.
I don't know what God's calling me all the time. God's calling me by just being present with you and listening to your questions and your comments. God is speaking to me. I'm called to think something differently, and how do I live in a way that my whole being is listening? You know, it's that odd film of Mary with her hands open at the Annunciation. He says, you know, here I am. So, I mean, that kind of consciousness, conscious living is very intense. To simply say, I'm listening, you know, I'm here, I'm listening. And I think that's important. The what you were sharing, Gabby, I'm thinking back, maybe some of you in the room, maybe all of you in the room remember. After the Second Vatican Council, when Queen of Apostles was formed,
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
that must be the, when Queen of Apostles was formed, you know, this place was
It's packed.
packed because this was one of the, it was Queen of Apostles, and in Cincinnati, it was the Jerusalem community with Richard Rohr.
Uh-huh.
Those two parishes
Yeah.
were considered the most radical, avant-garde, and it got to the point where you were on a waiting list to be able to get into this parish.
I was a founding member.
Okay, oh, there you go, there you go, you remember.
Good.
That was, it was the place to go because it was the creative, innovative, through liturgy and music and
We agonized over every the, it, is, that in the Constitution. We were here till 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, agonizing over
Yeah.
all that. Oh, yeah. Remember it well.
so, so this is why I believe church history is important.
I totally agree.
If you don't understand church history, you don't get it.
Mhm.
You can't understand people, you know, people aren't afraid of change, they're afraid of loss. You can't move the church forward if you don't understand church history. Because if you don't understand the early church of what it was like, you know, the early church was not the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages was not the Reformation. The Reformation wasn't the 19th century or the 20th century, or going to be the 20th. And I think that's what Pope Francis sees. We're in this different, they're in this different phase. Now, there was a time in the history of the church when every council or all the decisions were made not by the clergy, but by the emperor. And they were the ones who called the councils because they weren't happy with all this heresy and everything else that was going on, upsetting their power. And you know, and Jesus and his apostles, you know, Jesus was, you know, Peter was not the first pope. We didn't have that term pope. We named a pope after the fact. He was set up as a head of the church later. So, you know, names change. Names change. And only who knows, but anyway, it's a great time. But I know we go back to Richard Rohr in this archdiocese. Richard Rohr's name is anathema.
Really?
It's thou shalt not use his name or invite him to this diocese.
Wow.
Yeah, my sister was involved with that
Really?
community and I was involved with
So,
Yeah. walk with the
So,
village.
you know, but in the meantime, I can't tell you how many of my friends all read Richard Rohr, and I read
Oh,
Richard
yeah.
Rohr
Yeah.
and everything. So, you know, times change. Some of the great saints in history have been condemned at their moment of time, and then they were made saints. I mean, look at Dorothy Day. Now she's a servant of God. She's on her way towards, you know, and she was a woman who had an abortion. She had a child out of wedlock. We can go right through the whole list. She was involved with social justice, and the church didn't understand her social justice. And now so just wait. They don't like us now. You know, in 50, 100 years from now, they'll think you're great.
Takeaways.
Anyway, that's that. But I do want to, I'm going to close in this. There are more women doing more things in the church than we are aware, more from other parts of the country than in the United States. We're very isolated in the United States regarding what women are doing in the church. And most of the time they just keep it quiet. They don't have time to go and proclaim it from the rooftops. They simply just do what they have to do because they are church. And pardon?
Which goes back to that word
Agency, right.
agency and having
They-
a voice and being heard and being able to say what needs to be said and then being shut down.
Yeah.
Is something that's very prevalent in our diocese.
Right.
Unfortunately.
I know that only too well.
So
Yeah.
they're probably not worried about, what's going on, like, they're just doing what needs to be done.
Yep, yep.
And not, yeah. Boots on the ground and in the trenches and not worried about what they're supposed to do or allowed to
Clicking
do.
things.
Yeah,
Things off the list.
I don't think they took into account the level of people's grief around a lot of this stuff too. Like, and when you listen to the priest, the level of their grief for some of them.
Yeah. It was more like a business deal than any kind of compassion or emotion. And I agree, you don't make decisions just on emotions and all of that, but you can't just discard that either.
But in these parishes too, it's like the whole question of identity.
Yeah.
And you really hear that from people. So it's like you have to grieve what you've lost a little bit before you can kind of embrace the new thing that's gonna come. So how do we help people do that? I think?
Remember when some churches, after the Second Vatican Council and liturgical renewal, they removed the altar rails. Remember, when I was working up in the northern part of the Archdiocese, particularly in Minster, Ohio, because I was teaching there, giving some courses, and people were really upset that the altar rail was being moved because their families donated the money for that marble to come from Germany. And they were married at that altar. They made their first communion. They were really upset, and then time goes by and people forgot about it. Well, look at the chapel on campus. Case in point. Remember all the drama that was going on campus when they were simply renovating the chapel because it had to be renovated. The walls were collapsing, the ceiling was collapsing, and people were really upset. And I remember one faculty person who came, I was in a group and he was just irate because of what they were doing. And I said, well, is this your place of worship? He says, no, I'm not even a Catholic. And I said, why are you so upset? He said, well, it's a historical place. He says, well, I happen to go there and worship and I think it's great. I don't want the roof falling down on me. And, but now the years have gone and there were students who were upset. Faculty got other students. I mean, we create this drama around us. Our faculty who created drama with students, the students got upset. Now maybe I just don't hear it, but I don't hear anybody getting upset about the chapel. I think people are saying how beautiful the chapel is and people want to get married in the chapel. They forgot about it.
Yeah.
So you have to have enough faith that leaps over the crisis. You leap over the crisis. And here's something more that our God has a great sense of humor. And I'm glad that God is in some of the people I know. Anyway, that's it.
Well, thank you very much.
Anyway.
Thank you all
Thank
for coming and for all those who joined us virtually too. So thank you very much. Good timing because this is probably about to die.
1%.